From Old South Meeting House, filmed live in front of nobody, it's Tea Party Tonight with Rob Crean. Presented by Revolutionary Spaces. With special guests, artist and activist Tory Bullock and historian Jacqueline Beatty. And now your host, Rob Crean.
Good evening. Welcome to Tea Party Tonight. If you're watching for the first time, this is only our second episode, so we are a quick binge watch. Revolutionary Spaces, who oversees the Old State House and the Old South Meeting House, has been nice enough to allow us to do this twice. So if you enjoy the show, please do share it with your friends and family. And if you don't like the show, this is not happening. We're Antifa crisis actors, and this is the basement of a pizza shop. Our theme this show is monuments and historical memory, which is a big issue in America right now. For instance, here in Boston, there have been a lot of calls to rename Faneuil Hall because its namesake, Peter Faneuil, was a slave trader. I personally think the perfect person to rename the building after would be Prince Hall, a North End businessman, abolitionist, and advocate of African American education. You know, and not just because I think it would be fun for it to be called Hall Hall. Not just that. He also deserves it. But yeah, that is part of it. Speaking of the North End, our North End statue of Christopher Columbus has been getting attention lately. I've never understood the national interest in Christopher Columbus. To me, he's a genocidal maniac who honestly has nothing to do with our nation. When there are so many genocidal maniacs who do relate to our country. And when it comes to genocidal maniacs, buy American. There have actually been calls to remove the Columbus statue, especially after the summer when it was beheaded and had Black Lives Matter spray painted on it. Remove it now. Now that I like it, now it's art. Now it actually says something. Boston has an interesting history with who we choose to honor with monuments. For instance, our first portrait statue in Boston was of Benjamin Franklin in 1886. Interestingly, it was actually blown over in 2016 by a strong wind. Not, as I had assumed, torn down by anti-kite activists. It is fitting, though, that our first portrait statue should be of a man who, though born in Boston, left when he was 16. Sending a clear message to people in our fine city. If you want to succeed in Boston, leave. Similarly, in 2014, Boston erected a statue of Edgar Allan Poe, who was born in Boston, but left as a toddler. Poe said of Bostonians that they have no soul and are well bred, as very dull people very generally are. Ouch. In Boston, we don't like to support the artists that are here. We like to take credit for the artists who have left, no matter how young they were. We're taking credit for Edgar Allan Poe, even though he left Boston before he could read. There has been some effort to change things for the better, though. For instance, the Massachusetts State Legislature voted in January to change the seal and flag of our Commonwealth, long derided for its negative depiction of Native Americans. Contenders for the new flag include a broken lawn chair between two snowbanks, a fight at a Dunkin' Donuts, and Robin Williams on a park bench. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Malcolm X's boyhood home in Roxbury was added to the National Registry of Historic Places this month. Places that were designated before the only standing residence of the civil rights icon include a 6-story tall model of an elephant, a church organ so large children can crawl through it, and just like a real nice golf course. Sometimes comedy is just reporting, really. With the appointment of Marty Walsh as the Secretary of Labor, Boston City Councilor Kim Janey is making history, becoming Boston's first black mayor and first female mayor. Well, let's hope she sticks around longer than some other Boston mayors. So, homonym. His name sounds like the elected position. Sounds like John Mayer. Vaccinations are taking place at Fenway Park, and they are reported to cost 4 times as much as vaccines at other stadiums. It's an expensive stadium, is what we're saying. It's prices are high there. The vaccines are open to people who are 65 years or older, have 2 or more comorbidities, or are season ticket holders. At least I hope that part's true. After last season, they really deserve it. It sucks. They'll break your heart. They'll break your heart over and over again. This month marks the 145th anniversary of the first ever telephone call made here in Boston by Alexander Graham Bell. The first thing he ever said into a telephone was, "You up?" Not true, obviously. What he actually said to his assistant, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." To which Watson responded, "Who is this?" And finally, a lock of George Washington's hair was sold last month, estimated at $75,000. This was part of an auction for Massachusetts Historical Creep Society. We have a fantastic show for you this evening. We have artist and activist Tory Bullock. We have historian Jacqueline Beatty and lots of other assorted historical nonsense. It's going to be a lot of fun. Please stick around.
Hopefully soon, we'll all be able to travel and see some of the great historic sites around this country and around the globe. When that happens, I encourage everyone to come to Boston. In addition to Revolutionary Space's Old State House and Old South Meeting House, we have loads of other historic sites and monuments. I think that they're the best in the world, and I'm willing to put that to the test in a segment we call Boston Versus. First up is Philadelphia's Liberty Bell, a broken bell with historical significance that nobody knows in a city nobody likes. Here in Boston, we have the Liberty Tree. And sure, it's gone. It was cut down in the 18th century, but there's a monument to it in a building that used to house the Massachusetts RMV. If you're not familiar, the RMV is like a DMV, but it's in Massachusetts, because here in Boston, we like to make things one step more complicated than they need to be. The RMV moved though, and now it houses the crown jewel of all of Boston, a Dunkin' Donuts. San Antonio has the Alamo, which we will never forget. But here in Boston, we have the Alamo Rent-A-Car that Mark Wahlberg worked at in the movie Ted. Washington, D.C. has the Washington Monument. In Boston, we have the Bunker Hill Monument. They pretty much look the same, but the Bunker Hill Monument wasn't built by slaves, which actually, we should check on that, right? I hate to be wrong about that. Oh my God. The Washington Monument can boast that it hasn't been puked on as many times by a guy named Fitzy, but the Bunker Hill Monument is authentically Boston. We even named it after the wrong hill, because here in Boston, we love to make things one step more complicated than they need to be. Also in Washington, you can visit the National Archives and see the U.S. Constitution. But here in Boston, we have the USS Constitution. The extra S stands for savings. Now, the USS Constitution is undefeated, whereas the US Constitution has, let's be honest, taken some L's. Also, the USS Constitution is being refurbished, whereas the US Constitution is constantly being dismantled. South Dakota has Mount Rushmore, a monument shrine to 4 American presidents. But if you want to see 4 big, dense heads lined up next to each other, you can go to McGreevy's on Boylston Street. There's been some criticism of Mount Rushmore because it was built on stolen indigenous land. And now, of course, Boston was also built on indigenous land, but McGreevy's was built on landfill. We stole that land from Aquaman. New York City has the Statue of Liberty, a symbol of freedom throughout the world. In Boston, we have that girl at Mass Art who is committed to wearing only teal. Just as good and not as French. Internationally, there's Egypt's Pyramids of Giza. Here we have the majestic Pyramid of Boston. Sweet Caroline, oh, oh, oh. Good times never felt so good, so good, so good, so good. And let's not forget our sister nation, Ireland, where millions travel every year to kiss the Blarney Stone. Whereas in Boston, millions travel every year to kiss Fitzy's mom, Edna! On the border of Nepal and China, there is Mount Everest, the highest elevation in the world. Just outside Boston in Chelsea is a giant snow pile, which is the highest elevation in Massachusetts until it melts in early July. And that has been a segment of Boston Verse. Back to you, Rob.
Thanks, Kendra. Next, we've got an interview with a local artist, activist, and viral sensation who was instrumental in the recent removal of the Emancipation Memorial in downtown Boston. It's Tory Bullock. Thank you so much for being here.
What's going on, Rob? Pleasure to be here. Pleasure.
It's very exciting to have you here. As a Bostonian, I for many years was very embarrassed of the Emancipation statue that we used to have downtown. And so I was so impressed with your work around the removal of it. What was that experience like?
Insane. It was insanity. It was a lovely, organized, good insanity that led to a very great end product. But bottom line, for those of you who don't know, is that there was this statue called the Emancipation Memorial down in downtown Boston. And it was, how can I explain it for those of you who wouldn't know? It's Abraham Lincoln standing tall and proud, fully clothed, with a half-naked black man on his hands and knees in front of him, still with shackles and chains. Because it is a piece of artwork, it has inspired so much debate and kind of controversy throughout the years. And with everything that was going on this year with Black Lives Matter and everyone kind of having this reckoning with public art, it was an opportunity for me to kind of shine a light on a controversial piece that has always been in my life that I felt like would be a good time to get some momentum up to knock it over. So the experience of it was insane.
And you mentioned that it's always been in your life. Do you remember when you first saw it and how you felt when you did?
Oh, of course I do, Rob. It was, I was a child down there. I think I was celebrating somebody's birthday in my family. I think we were going down to Maggiano's or some restaurant down there. And I remember just walking by it and just instantly being like, oh, that's me. And I knew that it was me because of the texture of the statue's hair. The person who was on their hands and knees, I'm like, that looks like me. And I'm on my hands and knees beneath that other guy. I didn't know anything else other than that. And that's the image that stuck with me until this day.
Yeah, I mean, I found it to be a pretty disturbing image as an adult, but I can't imagine as a child, and especially a person of color as a child, to see that.
Absolutely.
But there were still people though that felt that there was enough merit to the statue that it should be kept up. What types of arguments did you hear from people?
Kind of the main argument that I heard was that this statue was paid for by freed slaves. And what they mean by that is that when this statue was first commissioned, it was kind of for tribute to Abraham Lincoln for the Emancipation. And the original funding for it came from freed slaves who wanted to say, hey, we want to acknowledge this moment and have something made. The problem with that argument, though, is that while they paid for it, no African Americans or people of color were involved in the actual creation of the statue. Those were all white people who decided what it was going to look like, who was going to be in it, and what postures they were going to take. So while the main argument I hear is that, hey, you guys paid for it, you should respect your ancestors here, I feel like by asking to redo it, it's the biggest kind of appreciation I can show them.
Yeah, and I mean, also, I'm sure that there were, lots of people who had been enslaved that were free that probably liked that statue at the time. But I mean, I think that it hasn't aged well. I mean, it's I think that that it's important for us to ask for more. What types of statues, monuments, and public art would you like to see more of in Boston?
Well, that's the thing. It's not a type of thing where it's like, I hate these statues, they need to come down and we need to put up the statues that everyone will like. Because just like you just said, at the time, they probably liked it. It was probably good for the time that they were in, but then time passed and things changed. So I think it's not really about the kinds of statues or specific statues I want to see more of, or public art. I just want to see a change in the mindset of things don't have to last forever, and times change. And something that we decide on right now for 2021, people in 2031 or 2051 or 61 may feel completely different, and it's okay if they want to do something about it.
And I think that a lot of people would argue that in our statues and monuments, it would be nice to see more diverse representation than we have now. Would you agree with that?
It depends. I think if it comes from an authentic place and the people who put them up know why they're going up. Something I want to stay away from is kind of performative action. This kind of feeling of, I'm going to just put statues up of the top 5 Black leaders I found on Google to kind of be good with the people. I really, if things are going to be diverse, I really, really want them to be from an authentic place, from people who understand why it's that way, or why it should be that way, rather.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, statues of Martin Luther King Jr. are great, but there should be probably other people represented as well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Who are some people, especially people from Boston, that you think could be highlighted more?
That's the thing. I don't necessarily have people in Boston. I just think that there are so many creative artists in Boston that can represent moments. Even something like, I don't have a problem with the Emancipation Proclamation being redone, having an artist with a new mindset saying, hey, I want to do this in this brave new way. So I kind of feel like I would love to see more kind of representations of the movements that have happened in the city and the world and nation. But yeah, I don't really have anyone specific that I would like to see up.
Have you heard from people that aren't necessarily a fan of what you do?
Oh, of course. This is a digital age. I'm on the internet. I hear from them all the time with everything I post, every cause I comment on, everything I choose to make a video about. It's kind of, the bigger it is or the bigger it gets, the more comments and kind of venom I get tossed my way. It runs the gamut from you're a traitor to your race to you should know your place, to you don't know what you're talking about, you should research these things more, and all that stuff. And it, for me, it's just a bunch of noise from people who want to just hear themselves talk a lot of the times. Yeah,
but I'm sure it must still it's hard to not take that stuff personally, I would imagine.
Oh no, not for me. It's real easy.
Really?
Because
that's great.
Well, because it's the type of thing where I'm like, a lot of times I love conversation. So if someone actually comes at me online in with an opposing view and they have a good point, I'm willing to sit and have a real conversation with them. What ends up usually happening is that I'll try to engage a conversation, and the conversation just ends up them yelling, arguing, and not listening or trying to have a real conversation. So it's real easy to kind of not care about the opinion of somebody who can't even hold a regular conversation with you.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that before. I'm a comedian, so I've definitely had people just maybe not understand jokes and be upset about them. But then I've also had people, critique my jokes and then explain to me why they were critiquing them, and thought, oh yeah, it's a really good point. I should maybe change my angle on that. Your art is very you talk about a lot of really important issues, and it's always very thought provoking, but most of your stuff seems to be fun and a lot of times funny.
Mhm.
Do you think that's important? Is that intentional, or is that just more kind of your personality coming through your art?
Oh, that's 10,000% intentional. I think it is in my personality, but for me, people let their guards down a bit more when they're laughing.
Yeah.
There's a lot more common ground found when you're laughing. So I feel like using humor to get people's guards down, but also using fun to talk about serious issues.
Yeah.
Activism doesn't always have to be boring and straightforward and mean and kind of aggressive or anything. It can just be a game that you set up to get people to feel the feeling that you want them to feel, to let them know, hey, so we're going to play a game about gentrification right now. You don't like how that feels, do you? Oh, so this is how I feel about gentrification as well. And then we can open up that dialogue. But yeah, I love using fun to talk about serious things. It just takes it to a whole nother level.
And that, just really quickly, you mentioned the gentrification game, which is it's such a cool project that you did. Could you just kind of give people that may not have had a chance to see it some details on that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So basically, it all started with a video. I came out with this video about gentrification happening in Boston, in Dudley Square at the time specifically, and it got a great reaction, went viral, great views, lots of comments, and people were really into it. So I wanted to kind of continue to talk about that topic, but like we were just talking about, I didn't want to do it in a kind of stuffy way. I wanted to do it in a fun way to get people to kind of wear this point even more. So I came up with this idea for a board game called the Gentrification Game, and it's a life-size board game, kind of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids status. And you step onto the board game, and your job is to survive and try to make it from this regular low-income neighborhood to Gentriville across the way, this sprawling, lovely neighborhood that's kind of a mirror neighborhood to your own, where instead of having fast food spots and check cashers, there are banks and actual theaters and clean spaces to be in. So it's really about seeing how long you can survive on this board before you have to be sent back to the beginning.
Gentrification is it's such a difficult topic. It can be, I mean, just depressing when you when you think about it. And so you being able to take that and say important things about it in a fun way is really cool. Museums have struggled to get diverse audiences into their spaces, and we're hoping that you could share your thoughts and experiences on why that is.
I think it's really simple, and I think it's a lot easier than people give it actually want to give it credit for. I've seen people hire kind of managing directors and all these people to come in and figure out the answer to that question, when the answer for me is real easy. The people at the top have to authentically want to have a diverse audience in their space. I think there are a lot of spaces that are really great at like throwing parties and mixes and all these kind of alternative events that are really fun and of a particular culture. But those seem to be the only times we're really invited in those spaces. Like if you have an exhibit or an event that specifically has to do with me, with graffiti or hip hop or stuff like that, that's when I get the call. I feel like when these spaces start getting artwork to exist outside of the one hallway that they have designated as the hip hallway, and you want to have multiple exhibits from around the world about different things to get a diverse audience in there. I think right now people don't want to go because it's just kind of like, there's nothing for me. There's no interest for anything for me. And while I'm in there looking at all this old American art, I feel uncomfortable being in the space because I'm not sure if while they say they want a diverse space, I'm not sure if they have the atmosphere or the culture to support that right now.
Can I ask where people can find you on social media, and also if you have anything else to add, please let us know.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So on social media, you can find me at Tory Bullock, first name, last name. That's where I post all of my most recent stuff, my most current videos. I'm a Facebooker, so that's where I am. So find me on Tory Bullock on Facebook. And then if you want to find me on Instagram, that's at Tory Shiloh on Instagram. That one's a little more obscure, but it's still filled with lovely content.
Great. I really appreciate that. And we will be right back with the game.
Bill Russell. Bill Russell is the greatest basketball player of all time. Easily the best Celtic, better than Larry Bird, and he's probably better than Jordan. Jordan had 6 rings. 6. It's okay. But Bill Russell had 11 rings. 11. Jordan also won his rings wearing his own brand of sneaker. Bill Russell played in Chuck Taylors. You know how good at basketball you had to be to play in Chuck Taylors? This is the shoe they had before they invented dribbling. Okay. Ooh. But the craziest thing about Bill Russell's career is that he played basketball in Boston in 1957. You know what's more racist than Boston right now? Boston in 1957.
Selected 1957. Please enter your access code to depart. Faster, please. Faster. Departing in 5, 4, 3.
Yeah, I'm not going back there. It's terrible. It's terrible. While Bill would be out winning rings, you know what would be happening back home in Boston? People would break into his house, steal his rings, write crazy shit on the walls, and then one time somebody actually in his bed. And what would Bill do? He'd go home, clean his walls, wash his sheets, and then win more rings. It's legendary. And how did we reward this man after he retired in 1969? We waited 40 years and then gave him a statue hidden behind City Hall. No one comes here. We gave the greatest basketball player of all time a statue stuck next to the ugliest building I have ever seen. Just put it across the street. Like, Faneuil Hall is the most popular tourist spot in the entire city.
Or put it next to the Garden. We don't have space for Bill Russell. We got space for Bobby Orr. And all he did was fall. What's the big deal about Bobby Orr?
It's not like we won the Stanley Cup with this.
We still got room for Bill Russell.
Bill Russell was the greatest, but Jordan is the one that gets all the love. Like, people see Jordan in the street and they lose their minds. Like, oh my God, Mike, you're my hero. You're an inspiration. Meanwhile, they see Bill Russell in the street and people stop him and say, oh my God, I'm such a huge fan. I love you, Morgan Freeman. And Bill's just like, look, I'm not Morgan Freeman. We're not the same shade. I don't have freckles. I don't know Andy Dufresne. He deserves our respect. He's earned our respect. We need to put his statue somewhere better. Near, like, I don't know, a duck boat route. Bill Russell is the greatest of all time. So with Bill Russell.
All right, now it's time for a game. So we're going to take a look at some statues in our great city and decide which ones we should definitely keep and which ones we can maybe do without. It's a segment we call the Statular. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to, in each round, we're going to show you 3 statues, and you can choose to keep 2, but one of them you're going to have to let go. All right, our first contestant stands on the shore of the north end of Boston. He's best known for discovering someplace he never actually went to. It's Christopher Columbus.
A lot of people say that I was a mean captain, self-centered opportunist, and my pursuit of wealth led to mass destruction of life. So yeah, I'm not here to make friends.
Up next, the colonial Donnie to his more successful cousin John's Mark Wahlberg, it's Samuel Adams.
Who's this bozo? He looks like an impatient Beethoven. Hey, here's my portrait. That's way harder. Forget about it.
And finally, a duck.
I'm not afraid to tell it like it is. And if you can't handle me in my wildest, then you don't deserve me when I'm pooping on a swan boat.
All right, maybe a tough choice, but which one of those do you think we should get rid of?
Rob, without a doubt in my mind, the ducks. All of that. You see those ducks? Ugh, disgusting. No, I'm gonna have to go with on that one. I'm gonna go with Christopher Columbus. Not for the obvious reasons of him like completely, like doing what he did throughout history. But his voice in that one, I just felt like I was getting a vibe from him as a person. I was just like, he's not the one for me.
Yeah.
So you gotta keep it moving.
Yeah. All right, great. Let's move on to our next round. Oh, that sound means, of course, it's time for our horse round. All right.
Which of these three wonderful equestrians do you think deserves to be kept as a statue here in Boston? And which one do you think it's time to put out to pasture? First, we've got a horse who served under the first president of the United States. And I don't mean in his cabinet, it's George Washington's horse.
A lot of people said Washington was the father of our nation. Let me tell you something. I carried that wooden tooth fancy mouth from worst to first, and I can carry you, baby.
Our next contestant is a horse best known for carrying Boston's favorite French American almost all the way to Concord.
I'm in almost every tourist picture, which is amazing since the artist that made me made everything real big. Everything.
If you've been to Massachusetts' new State House, you've entered alongside this beautiful horse. It's General Joseph Hooker's horse.
I'm really glad that guy didn't have any jokes because that could have gone bad. So which one of these two do you want to keep and one do you want to send to the glue factory?
You know what? I'm going to have to send Paul Revere's horse to the glue factory on this one. They seemed a little arrogant. They seemed a little too full of themselves. Like, all the tourists are getting the pictures of them. So I wasn't really feeling that vibe. But so I'm going to have to stick with, who was the last one?
The last one was General Joseph Hooker.
Yes, I'm going to have to go with Hooker and Washington. I'm going to keep their horses.
Great. All right. So long, Brown Beauty, Paul Revere's supposed horse. Our final round is all statues which are featured at Revolutionary Space's Old South Meeting House.
Our first contestant in this round is a literary luminary who was enslaved for much of her life by a member of the Old South Meeting House. It's Phyllis Wheatley Peters.
I was the first published African-American poet. My work was celebrated in my lifetime, and I got paid almost nothing for it. Keeping up my statue is literally the least you could do.
Our next contestant is the only contestant in this game to have a Mighty Mighty Boston song written about them. It's the Rascal King himself, James Michael Curley.
I help expand the subway transit system and play by my own rules. I was reelected to office while serving time in federal prison. That's why they call me the bad boy of Boston. What? No one calls me that? What about the Jamaica Plain Punk? Governor Thunder? Mayor McCheese?
Our last contestant is an advocate of birth control rights, eugenics, and freedom of speech, Margaret Sanger.
I should just say that's her mouth is covered, which is something she did when protesting free speech. She's not just trying to be safe from COVID, but not covering her nose.
And which one am I getting? I'm getting rid of one of these.
Yes. So yeah, which one of these do you think we should get rid of?
Statues or people? Like people from history?
Oh, statues. Like which? I mean, they're all dead.
I'm gonna have to go with even though I'm a fan of him, man. He sold me with everything that he was saying in his little speech there. But James Curley. James Curley. If his actual nickname was the Bad Boy of Boston, I would absolutely be keeping him. But
yeah, no, his nickname was the Rascal King. That's his actual nickname.
Yeah, no, let's get him out of here.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for playing. That has been the Statular. Tory Bullock, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to what you're going to do next.
Thank you so much for having me, and good luck to everyone here working on this amazing product. Thank you, man. It was a blast.
Last episode, some of the writers and I tried a colonial era drink called Flip. It's got a fun name, but it tastes gross. So this episode, we're going to try a colonial era drink that has a gross name, but tastes great. Grog. Check it out.
Hey everyone, welcome to a segment of the show where we're going to make a colonial era drink known as grog. Happy to be joined by a couple of our writers, Wes and Kendra, as well as I don't drink myself, so I have some people in my bubble who are going to be drinking the drink for me.
That's fine. Shakir. That's Shakir. I'm Angela. Hello, nice to see you.
Hi, I'm Heather.
We all live here.
It's a beautiful thing. Hi, everybody. I'm Wes Hazard. And yeah, we're making grog, which is a rum drink. Specifically, it's a variant of rum, diluted mixed with water and spiced with brown sugar that was used a lot by the Royal Navy, especially their squadrons that were working in the Caribbean back in the colonial era.
Hi, my name is Kendra. I heard that grog was used as payment, right?
It was issued daily, twice a day to Royal Navy sailors from like 1756 up until all the way till 1970.
A lot of us are stand-up comedians, so we can definitely relate to the idea of being paid with alcohol.
Yes, very true. And with getting scurvy, honestly. Diet isn't always great.
Yeah, there's actually some debate about that. So while this does have lime in it, people think that was used to prevent scurvy. I've found that actually that tends to be a myth because the scurvy stuff was only a worry for really transatlantic voyages because you're in the middle of nowhere. If you're stationed in Jamaica, there's food and citrus and everything all around you. I think it's just for flavor, and I'm down with that.
So what is in grog?
So got a little rum, a alcoholic spirit derived from sugarcane. So what whiskey is to wheat, what vodka is to potatoes, rum is to sugar.
We have different types of rum. So I have Bacardi, favorite of Cardi B.
The recipe called for dark rum. This is a black rum, which I don't know what the difference is between dark rum and black rum, but the only brand of dark rum that they had at the store was Plantation brand, and I just felt uncomfortable buying.
Well, Rob, black rum is rum of African descent, and dark rum is a rum that is a rum of color, may not be black. This rum looks not white, so I think it's a dark rum.
Bamboo. It's not the darkest rum, but it's not the lightest either. So this is a nice rum that I like. It's got some banana and vanilla notes into it, and now I'm just going to massacre that with lime and sugar.
This lime juice, it's not fresh, but a modern day equivalent of fresh lime juice.
I have a lime that I got at City Feed and Supply here in Jamaica Plain.
I am using a fresh squeezed lime. The recipe we're using calls for a half ounce of lime juice, which I have just discovered is about a full lime.
And then there's also brown sugar. So I have this bougie brown sugar that I think I got from Trader Joe's. It's organic.
Yeah.
You have the same brown sugar? Oh, hell yeah.
As do I.
maybe we can get Trader Joe's to sponsor the next episode.
Yeah, that would be great. So what's the first step?
I don't think there's any kind of steps to this. This is just a concoction, right? So I think you can just get a glass and throw all your stuff into it. A half ounce of lime juice, 3 ounces of water, half a tablespoon of brown sugar, 3/4 of an ounce of dark rum, and then a sprig of mint to give it that extra special.
Does it look like about a half ounce?
Sure.
It's a lot.
I love lime. I'm okay with it being overly limey. Like the British.
That's exactly why we call them the limeys, because of the scurvy thing.
I don't have shot glasses because I'm a bad alcohol drinker millennial, but I do have this tablespoon measure, or half tablespoon. I was told by Heather that 2 tablespoons is equal to 1 ounce, so I'm gonna go by that. We need a half ounce of the lime, right?
Correct, yep.
Cool, all right, so I'm gonna do that.
Okay. And a little side note, the name grog comes from the Admiral Edward Vernon. Apparently he had a jacket made out of a fabric called grog grain or grogram, and his nickname was Old Grog. So we can confirm that he was the most boring man who ever lived, given that the fabric of his jacket.
Yeah, his nickname is nothing about his personality, nothing about even anything permanent about what he looks like, just about a specific item of clothing.
I mean, Rob, when I met you, you wore a denim jacket almost exclusively. I called you old denim in my head. I never admitted it before.
Yeah, I guess, to be fair, I have often been referred to as Crean jeans. So I can't really. Now, how much mint is this? So this is just a sprig. It's just a sprig.
Gentle sprig.
What's a sprig? Is this whole thing a sprig, or is it just one leaf?
I would say
like 2 of the leaves.
They shouldn't be muddled.
The recipe that we got didn't call for it. That seems to make sense. I guess you can hand muddle, crumble it up a little bit.
I'm about to get spring water. The spring water that I have is Boston tap water. So fresh from the spring. wherever it's from.
Quabbin Reservoir.
Is that a spring?
It's a drowned town. It used to be a town that's flooded.
So like might be some haunted ghost in the water.
This is New York City's finest tap. I got my 3 ounces of water. I got my lime juice. I'm just going to add those together so I can free up this shot glass to use it for measuring. It says 3/4 of an ounce, but I'm going to go for a full one. So a big part of the reason why they have alcohol in their daily ration anyway, if you put water in a cask and send it over the Atlantic Ocean, eventually it's going to get slimy and algae and not really palatable. So people would just put first wine and beer and then eventually rum mixed with it. All right, and some lime.
All right, and then, so I think I got most of mine except for the sprig of mint.
Smells good.
I'm going to do an anachronism and put some ice in this just because I feel I deserve it.
That's fair.
Boom.
You said we can muddle them. I don't have a muddler. I'm just gonna tear it apart a little bit.
This is basically a Cuba Libre, right? Isn't that a cocktail?
I wonder if this cocktail was like taken from Cuba. Another example of colonialism.
The slave labor and the sugar were definitely taken from Cuba. So.
I mean, yeah, and the rum. I don't know how you guys are in your journey. I think mine is basically ready.
I think I'm good to go whenever, yeah.
Is ready? You want to
There you
cheers?
go.
All right.
It's the cheers, or as I like to call it, a triangle trade. of
Cheers, my
thanks.
virtual friends.
Beverage. Hello, hello. All right, let's have a taste.
It's actually
That
pretty
is so
good.
much better than.
Oh, that's
oh my
pleasant.
God.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. It is nice.
How would you say this compares to our last experimental drink?
Much better. It's much more refreshing. And it won't get me messed up in my girlfriend's kitchen. So that is one good thing.
May I ask what the last drink was?
Our last drink that we did was flip.
Well, that's awful. That's
But I believe that this one will not have me sick in my bathroom at 3 a.m. tonight. So I'm very happy about that.
This is like a refreshing after work kind of thing. If you're a British soldier, after terrorizing lots of people in the colonies, you could relax, have a little bit of this, and then go back to ordering around some brown people.
Cheers to the Bay of Bengal and the Caribbean Sea.
This one's for Crispus addicts.
And the Arawaks.
The Wampanoag, the Narragansett, the beer and the tribe.
All colonized people, may we rise again.
This is healthier because, like, as much as you're drinking, I still took in 3 times as much just pure clean water as I did rum. So, I mean, I can lie to myself and tell myself that this is like, you know.
To not get too drunk, is it okay if I eat another historically accurate food, a banana?
Absolutely.
It's also grown in colonies, I believe. Oh no, where'd Russ go?
We lost what?
I don't know.
I was just getting a call from a child, my goddaughter, so I decline it to drink rum with you fine people. But
Okay, that's sweet.
It's very refreshing, chilled. I think that's the consensus, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna go in the opposite direction. I'm gonna ask you guys to drink it hot.
Okay.
So
Oh God.
Is that the way they drank it?
It would normally be drink at room temperature because they're serving it on a ship out of barrels. On the Royal Navy ships, it was a 4-to-1 ratio, which is basically what we have near 2. I have to see what this hot grog looks like.
I want to see.
It's like mulled wine, but Caribbean.
I think I might have put in the double rum because I couldn't remember if I put it in. So there might be twice as much rum.
I know you put a double rum.
Did you see?
No, but I tasted this.
I just feel bad for that sailor who signed up for the service in like 1970, and his first day was the day they no longer gave rum twice a day. Like, what a,
They ended that in 1970?
1970. This was a debate. It was a massive debate in Parliament about it, whether to do it or not.
If you're gonna have people defend your empire, you might as well give them rum twice a day.
If you work in a cubicle, you should get rum twice a day.
I would drink this willingly.
Yeah.
I would order this at a bar and not feel bad for the bartender that they have to like mix eggs together between 2.
It was very easy to make. It's refreshing. It can be enjoyed both cool and warm. Grog, I get this thumbs up, right?
Thumbs up.
I mean, now in 2021, back in colonial times, this required a lot of slave labor. But for now,
True.
beautiful, loving it.
Yeah, this is pretty good. Good job. British people do one thing right.
Colonize.
Make alcoholic drinks. The colonization is mad about.
Yeah, they might do colonizing well, but I don't think they do it right.
I mean, is there a right way to do colonialism? I don't know.
Just don't.
That's our message here at Tea Party tonight is colonialism. Just don't.
Our next guest is the Assistant Professor of History at York College of Pennsylvania. She's doing really interesting work on women's history in the American Revolution. Please welcome Dr. Jacqueline Beatty. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This should be fun.
I want to start by asking, women in colonial history are often pretty underrepresented. How did colonial women assert themselves?
Yeah, so women and other marginalized groups are sometimes considered to be not really present, not really participating, not really asserting themselves because of the kind of popular narrative of American history that we have that favors kind of white men in power, right? But that is only true if we take the perspective of the white men in power, right? So in this case, colonial and revolutionary era American women really asserted themselves in a range of ways. Sorry, my dog's here in the background. They asserted themselves in a range of ways, at the very least, out of necessity, right? They were there, so they're obviously going to be asserting themselves. But they also had really important social, economic, and political influence as well that I think is largely unknown by the general public. So it's actually really hard to answer that question because there are infinite numbers of ways in which colonial women asserted themselves. But I'm going to try and give you maybe a few examples that are kind of more broad to make some broad assertions here. So one example is that women's labor, women's work is really essential to the survival and the success of their families and the state, right, and the government. This includes domestic labor, which at the time, right before modern conveniences, is physically demanding, it's time consuming, and it's really difficult to manage, right? And then you just have to get up and do it all again the next day.
It's a pre-Swiffer era.
Yes, it's pre-Swiffer, it's pre-vacuum, it's, what is the scariest to me, pre-washing machine and dryer, right? Laundry. At that point in time, you had to be really, really strong to do the laundry. So that labor is really critical. But, so is women's reproductive labor, right? A lot of families depended on the labor of their children, and giving birth to and raising children is not an easy feat. And that's white women, right? We have to expand the conversation to include Black and particularly enslaved women whose labor was essential, right? In terms of political power and participation, I think we have to disabuse ourselves of the notion that political power only means voting and holding elected office, right? Everything is political. So there's a ton of ways in which women in this era have political power. There's one example in particular that I think is really powerful. There was a group of women in Philadelphia during the Revolution. They called themselves the Ladies Association of Philadelphia. Benjamin Franklin's daughter was one of the chairwomen of this organization. And they basically went door to door raising money for the Continental Army, right? It's pretty extraordinary, the work that they did. They created this very kind of complex organizational hierarchy. They used the press to advertise and promote their efforts. And they created a model for women in other colonies and states to follow. So they ultimately raised a ton of money, which they really wanted to go to pay salaries of Continental soldiers, which were, we'll say, severely lacking at this point in time. Yeah. But George Washington stepped in and redirected the funds to clothing that the soldiers also desperately needed, right? And they kind of, assented to his authority, right? And he kind of condescendingly suggested that these women themselves be the ones to make the shirts for the soldiers with the money that they raised. Their reception is kind of mixed. We get critics who say that it's inappropriate. Some call it absurd, the work that the women are doing, kind of going about for money, as they say. And they framed it as female patriotism, which I think is an important distinction to make, because they are creating an exception for their actions in a way that wouldn't have challenged the kind of white male hierarchy, right? That they were not doing things that were, I should say, they were doing things that were appropriate for women to do because they framed it as female patriotism. And of course, these women are wealthy, right? They have a level of privilege that enables them to do this work in a way that gave them that advantage. I think a lot of folks probably know about figures like Abigail Adams. She also had a number of friends like Mercy Otis Warren and Judith Sargent Murray. These are extraordinary women, kind of the exception, not the rule, in the way that they were very engaged politically and very much speaking out on these issues. But ordinary women really did have plenty of opportunities to participate politically as well, right? I mean, the revolution is a massive economic crisis in addition to a political one. And right, those economic issues are the ones that most people relate to and focus on. So women were really critical in the kind of economic side of the revolution. They were central figures in boycotts, in kind of the home manufacturing to make the boycotts work, in these non-importation agreements. These movements were among the most successful protests in the revolutionary era, and they wouldn't have been possible without women's assent to these activities and women's participation in these activities, right? That the revolution is full of crowd action, right? These out-of-door protests, and women were part of those crowds too, and that wasn't contingent upon class or race. So those kinds of forms of political activism are incredibly accessible. We just don't necessarily hear stories of the centrality of women's roles there too.
So you've talked a lot about power being, more of a spectrum than it's sort of a, something that people have or don't have. It is a spectrum. But what do you really mean by that?
Yeah, so I think we tend to think about and talk about power in a really absolute binary way, like either you have it or you don't. But that's not how it works. It's not how it worked throughout history. That's not how it works now. Power is expressed and asserted by degrees, right? You don't have to be the president of the United States to have power. And certainly, in our society and throughout history, there have been individuals and groups who have been more powerful than others. And it's often the case that those in power attempt to use various structures to maintain a stranglehold on that power, right? That's kind of one of the central narratives in history. So in early American society, the economy and political power was really structured around a white patriarchal system that favored elite white men, which meant that everyone else's power, which really meant that everyone else's power was contingent upon that structure, right? So elite white women's opportunities were basically limited relative to what their white male counterparts were doing. But relative to elite white women, lower income white women had more limited power, and even more limited than that was the power of Indigenous and Black women, right? That's where that spectrum is a really useful metaphor, I think, because it's much more useful to think of power that way, because you can both understand the ways in which people can express power and agency over their own lives and in society, but also recognize the massive structural limitations on the full expression of their power, right? It's neither saying that they're fully empowered to control their lives, nor saying that they're fully disempowered, right? It's marginal, it's by degrees, it's on a spectrum.
If you had to choose one thing to be the sort of the biggest misconception that people have about what life was like for women around the time of the revolution, what would you say that would be?
I think it's just the notion that colonial women were disempowered and were devoid of rights. I see this a lot from my students, that they assume that women didn't have power or rights until the 19th Amendment was passed, right? And somehow that magically transformed women's roles in society. But as I've already described, I mean, women have countless ways in which they are empowered in society and in their own lives, right? Obviously, still within an incredibly restrictive system, but that doesn't make them like inactive members of society either.
Why is women's history important?
Well, women make up, by some calculations, more than half of the population. So I think on the surface, it's important to draw attention to the majority of the population, right? But women's experiences are different from men's, right? So they warrant specific study, particularly because throughout history, women have been subjugated by men and purposefully written out of the narrative, right? If if women were written into the story from the beginning, we wouldn't necessarily have to do all this kind of extra work to try and reinsert women and recenter American history around women's experiences. I mean, what would you think if we kind of just erased men from history, right? That wouldn't be good either, right? But it's really important to be inclusive.
I'm going to be on as a man. I'm going to say there's a lot of stuff. There's more stuff that it would be great to get rid of than it is to keep.
Right. Okay. Well, fair argument. But I think, we can't understand American history without knowing women's history, right? Like any other marginalized group, it's absolutely necessary to understand women's history in order to understand American history. So
thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you being here. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jacqueline Beatty.
Thank you.
As we consider the continuing relevance of monuments, we ask the question, could some of these use a little freshening up? In a segment we call Monumental Accessories. Everyone knows ducks are America's third worst bird after seagulls and, of course, Canadian geese. You can't be both migratory and territorial. The only reason Boston even has a monument to these hideous abominations is because of a book, Make Way for Ducklings, that doesn't even have chapters, which is why we propose that it be accessorized after a more worthy Boston story, The Departed. Each duck would be fitted with a scally cap, a tracksuit, and a Boston accent that sounds like it was put through a meat grinder. Hey, look, I know it's not what's actually important about him, but everyone just knows Samuel Adams for the beer. And hey, historic sites always need extra funding, so why not take a little from the Boston Beer Company and accessorize Sam here with some cold ones? And if it works, imagine what we could do with Boston Commons Brewer Fountain. Arthur Fiedler, seen here in an evidently 3D printed bust, was a legendary Boston Symphony Orchestra conductor. What's cooler than Arthur Fiedler? Arthur Fiedler with shades. How do you accessorize Cheshire, Massachusetts monument to a 1,235-pound wheel of cheese, which was given to Thomas Jefferson on January 1st, 1802, in protest of fines and property taxes on Massachusetts and Connecticut Baptists? Well, with red wine and apple slices, of course. They pair well with cheese. Michael Alfonso's Journey Monument represents the contributions made to Cape Cod and the islands by African Americans and Cape Verdeans. What better way to accessorize this beautiful monument than by adding all the other planets and making it a scale model of the solar system? Taunton, Massachusetts boasts a beautiful statue of Robert Treat Paine. And what better way to accessorize the Silver City's favorite son than with a silver medal to commemorate his coming in second in the Boston Massacre trial? Meaning he lost. There's no third place in a trial. The Danvers Witchcraft Victims Memorial pays respectful homage to the victims of the Salem witchcraft trials in the location where the trials actually took place. I think a perfect accessory for this monument would be directions to Salem, where all the fun stuff is, and they don't take state-sponsored murder of innocents so seriously. I mean, come on, this place is a drag. Lowell's Industry Not Servitude pays tribute to the first female labor organization in America. Perfect accessory, a couple of men trying to cover it with a glass ceiling. And finally, Boston's famous steaming tea kettle. Perfect accessory, a scone. We'll be right back. And that's our show. Thank you to Tory Bullock and Professor Jacqueline Beatty. Thank you to Tawan Dagona and Tres Gatos for the Bill Russell video. You can check out Tres Gatos' new short, Rope It Up, and their upcoming feature, Salesman. They're both excellent. Thank you to all of our writers and everyone here at Revolutionary Spaces. Thank you to the New England Women's Club Fund at the Boston Foundation and the Lowell Institute for grant support. We will see you for our next episode here on the internet on June 24th, and hopefully eventually we'll see you in person here at the Old South Meeting House and at the Old State House. Stay healthy, everyone. We hope to see you soon.